Again, I'm an assistant professor in the School of Visual Arts in the College of Architecture and Urban Studies. And that's my email there, mdrum@vt.edu. And I would love to hear from anyone, all of you, at any time, because I really enjoy hearing from students and other faculty and staff, what they're doing and what they think about augmented reality and social projects. How people use augmented reality to tell stories about social issues. Sort of like what you were talking about, Mike, with the coal plant. So my current project is called Monument Public Address System. And that the image there on the left is a still from one of the prototypes that I've made for my team. Pardon me, I have a little bit of a cold. I have to get a cough drop in a second here. Prototypes for my team. This is another one. And this is another one. When I say my team, I've been lucky enough to receive 2 ICAT grants, Institute for Creativity, Arts, and Technology here at VTech, Virginia Tech, and they've helped me to hire some undergrads, some very talented undergrads through the library, through the ARES system with Todd Ogle. And it took us a little while to figure out, excuse me, I am gonna have to get a cough drop. It took us a bit to figure out what platform we wanted to use for this project. And since this is this human computer interface. Is it interface or interaction? I always get those 2 mixed up.
Interaction. Yeah.
Thank you. Interaction. I do want to talk about those technical decisions in terms of what platform we're using. So it took us a while. We initially wanted to use Unreal and move from Unreal to ARKit and ARCore. And we worked all summer. I got the grant in the spring, or in the, I guess in February maybe, of this year. So we worked all summer in Unreal, and we didn't really get anywhere. It was a bit frustrating. And then at the end of the summer, another student came on, Sam Laley, who's been really great. He is really good at Unity. So I said, why don't we try Unity? And Unity has recently released something called AR Foundation. Has anybody used AR Foundation here?
No.
I highly recommend it. It was so easy to move from Unity using AR Foundation to Xcode and onto our iPhones and iPads. We've only been testing on iPhones and iPads right now, but soon we're going to be using tablets and, excuse me, non-Apple phones, because I want to publish this on both of those platforms to make it as available as possible. But anyways, AR Foundation has been great. The nice thing that Unity has done is it's made it so that you can use the same Unity scene to easily move to the Xcode for Apple and to the distribution software for Google Play. So another image of me experimenting with how a user would interact with the AR. I'll come back to these. So I'll come back to the user interface in a minute. But first, so there's 2 things I want to do today. One, I want to talk about how I use AR, and the other thing is I want to talk specifically about the social issue that I'm addressing. Again, forgive me for my cold. When I moved back to the Southeast, I'm originally from the Southeast, and when I moved back to the Southeast 2 years ago, I knew I wanted to make a piece about Confederate monuments because I grew up in the South, kind of immersed in the civil rights movement because that was important to my parents. And something that I thought a lot about growing up was racial issues in the South. And when Charlottesville happened a few years ago, when the Unite the Right rally happened in Charlottesville and the horrible death of the counter protester, I knew then, at the time I was living in Arizona, I knew then that I wanted to make a piece about monuments. And I wanted to come back to the East Coast. And I made my way back here. And I started working on this issue because it seems like such a pressing issue that kind of brings together a lot of the tensions in our society right now in terms of race and representation and power, and how power is how power manifests in public spaces. So I started to interview people when I got back here, and I've been amassing this archive of interviews with a whole bunch of different kinds of people who have a range of perspectives on the monuments. I mean, I must admit that the majority of the people that I've interviewed are critical of the monuments. And that's, I think, because of who I am and who I'm able to connect with. I mean, it's one thing to talk to someone about these issues. It's another thing for people to be willing to be recorded and for their voices to be part of a public project. So even though my graduate student and I have reached out to some people who have more conservative views about the monuments, we've had a hard time getting people to agree to be recorded. So that's kind of like an imbalance in my archive of interviews. But even within the interviews of people that are critical of this racial history that's memorialized by these monuments, there are variations, and I think it's in those variations that I want to pull out. And so when I got back to Virginia, I started on these interviews, but I also had augmented reality in mind because it's something that you can do in public spaces, like outside, as opposed to a musical performance or a cinematic piece. I mean, of course, people do projections outside, but when you think about like something like an artwork, since I'm an artist, normally artworks are contained in like art spaces, and augmented reality is one of those forms, like projection outside, that can exist in public spaces. So yeah, that's why I chose to use augmented reality. And as I've been doing these interviews, I've also been reading scholarship on the issue of monuments. And a scholar that I really respect, who teaches at Howard University, has written a lot of really thoughtful things about monuments. She's from Brazil herself, and she writes about monuments all along the east coast of the Americas, from South America to North America in relationship to the history of slavery. So I'll just read this, even though you can read it too. I think my throat's a little better. So this comes from an article she wrote a couple of years ago in History News Network. And I read this article as I first started this project, so it stayed with me. This quote has remained in my mind as I've been working. When Black and brown people open a textbook, visit a museum, or look at the statues displayed in major squares of the main European and American capitals, they only see images of white men who were wealthy, who had power, and who were very often were slave traders or slave owners. Then, when Black men, women, and children are challenging pro-slavery statues, they are denouncing this past that remains alive in the present. They are calling attention to their present day economic and social exclusion. And later in the article, she says, all monuments emerge and disappear because of political battles that take place in the public arena. Likewise, public memory is always political. So these two quotes from her article, as I said, have been kind of like bedrock for me. I keep coming back to. And I think of my piece as trying to operate within her perspective, that public memory is always political. And one of the striking things that I hear from the people I'm interviewing is the concern that this history will not be fully reckoned with. And I think as a nation, we're trying to reckon with the history of slavery, and we probably will be for a very long time. But some people are concerned that when these monuments are removed, that the empty spaces will no longer function as a way for that memory to be processed. And so they're concerned, that maybe these, there's been a lot of controversy since these monuments, a lot of them have been removed, those in Charlottesville and Richmond, for instance. And so people are concerned, well, where did they go, right? And there's been controversy about, for instance, the one from UNC, where did it go? And there was controversy about how it was processed. So that's where we are, right? And I kind of feel like I want my piece to be a part of that reckoning. And even though these monuments are being, actively being removed and changed, I think we're going to be dealing with that issue of what gets commemorated in public space for decades, because we're now going to have to figure out, well, what gets put in that on Monument Avenue now in Richmond. What replaces those monuments. And so I want my archive of voices to be accessible in those public spaces as one form of trying to deal with that issue, right? Of what comes next, what gets added to these places. So yeah, so those are my reasons for doing this. And at this point, I've made quite a few animations showing how a participant can experience this. So for instance, the woman in the middle there is walking with her iPad, and she's walking around a Lee statue. This is actually a scan of a model created from the Lee Monument in New Orleans that was taken down. And these golden, the people in the golden circles in my schematic here, this is my prototype design, are virtual. So in this scene, the things that are virtual are enclosed in those golden globes. This is another schematic that I've come up with. And in fact, this is the schematic that we're using now, that the person will approach the monument or the space where the monument no longer exists, and be able to interact with these virtual things. And again, the virtual things are golden. They're the avatars and the golden spheres and the golden orbitals that they're on. And so when the person touches their screen, sort of taps one of the golden orbs, they get to hear one section of the interviews. So And this is what happens when she touches the sphere. She's surrounded by the kind of virtual changes, and she gets to kind of interact with these broken statues and this horse that's free of its rider while she's listening to the interview. So this is what she sees while she's listening to the interviews. So there's the broken statues, there's the horse that no longer has its rider, and there's tobacco plants and cotton plants. So at this point, we're testing this setup in with Sam Laley, my wonderful student, and we've gotten it to work, and so we're approaching that point where we could release a first version. So I will send that to you. It should be probably in January. So I'll send it to you so you could play around with it. And just so you know, I've decided to make this so you can open it anywhere. Initially, I thought maybe I would make it so you could only open it if you were in one of these public squares, but then I realized that would really limit people's access to it. So going backwards, I'm going to jump around just a tiny bit. So forgive me, I've presented on this topic quite a lot, but I kind of decided to do it a little differently today. So because I'm talking to you guys, I wanted to talk a bit more about augmented reality and my history with it. So I started using augmented reality in 2011. I was in graduate school at UC Santa Cruz, and I became friends with a developer there who had made his own platform from the ground up, using a lot of libraries, borrowing libraries, but created the platform from the ground up with C++. So together, he and I and a couple other friends, we created a small LLC, and we released 7 apps on the Apple Store, including this one. Sorry, I guess I didn't make that live. That's okay. Including this one, which I like to share because it's kind of it's really different from the Monument project. This one I made with my students at Pratt. I was teaching at Pratt at the time, and I don't know if you guys have ever been to the Pratt campus, but they love their cats there. So I think we have cats. A lot of university campuses feed their cats, but it's really sort of a big deal at Pratt. There's little houses where the cats live, and it's kind of part of the personality of the campus. So my students created a AR piece where you meet this cat. Let's see. So you meet this cat at the corner of DeKalb and Hall on the Pratt campus. And there she is. And she takes you on a tour of the campus. I'm just going to move it forward a bit. My internet's a bit slow, so it might, oops. See if it'll play. Sorry. So she asked you to do a variety of different things with her as you explore the campus, including trying to free this bird. And we made this in 2013. And we're almost there. There's one more vine, I think. 2 more. Maybe we had too many vines that you had to clear. So your object there is trying to free this bird. It's a little clunky. Oh, come on. There we go. Okay. Now you free the bird. She thanks you. And then you have to the cat takes you on and to a few other places on campus where you play these games. So a more serious project that I made, oops, he's still playing, sorry. Cat still wants to play with this. A more serious project, or a project that's more like the monument project that I also made with AR at that time in 2013, is called Oyster City. I'll just show you a little bit of this. So in this project,
City AR is an augmented reality.
I'll silence it. In this project, you are invited to use the AR on your mobile device on Governor's Island in New York City. And so you open the, this project actually is geolocated. So it only works on Governor's Island. So once you're on the island, you can play this game, and it's a little bit like the cat. You go around the island and you have a map and you collect these coins, and you kind of have to solve very simple puzzles, not very not very difficult, because the main purpose here is pedagogical. And at each place in the island, you learn about the island's history and the harbor's history at large with oysters, and how oysters are these keystone species in the harbor, and they clean the water, and they provide habitat for young aquatic animals. So you guys have probably heard about the oyster beds. Oops. Sorry. I'm gonna go back to, I'm gonna close this because my internet's too slow to deal with it. Okay. So, so the point being that we wanted to engage people with the edge of the harbor and with this history of oysters in New York City. You guys may have heard about the oysteries being planted in the Chesapeake all along the East Coast as a form of bioremediation. So, so our project looks at that. And again, at each point in that you gather a coin, you get to learn a little bit more about how oysters, again, the history of oysters in New York City. And New York City has a love of oysters that goes back to the very beginnings of, the very beginnings of human habitation there. There's lots, and this is the case all over the Americas, but there are oyster beds, middens, that show Native American love of oysters, where you can find mixed in with the oyster shells, pottery, and other forms of human civilization. So these middens are very old. So, you know, humans and oysters have coexisted along the Atlantic coast for a very long time, until, unfortunately, industrial pollution killed them out and over harvesting. And so now we're trying to build them back. So this piece is, as I mentioned, is very much like the monument project in that it's a collection of historical bits that we geolocated across the landscape. And the idea was that learning in place, you know, place-based learning. So back to Monument Public Address System. Since the development of the AR has been a bit slow, it was when I was working with Phoenix, who is the developer who I met in California, things went really quickly because I was able to just create these designs and he would make the AR happen. So things have been a little bit slower here, but Sam now is really cooking with gas with the Unity and the AR Foundation. So we're almost done, but before Sam came on board, the project, the AR part of this Monument Public Address System was moving very slowly because I know Unity, but I just didn't know it well enough to kind of try moving it into the AR Foundation. So, so in the meantime, while I was collecting these interviews, I created a Mozilla Hubs site. Let's see if it'll open. If not, let's see, I have it here. Okay, so I created a Mozilla Hub site, whoops, to to allow people to, or to allow myself to publish some of the interview parts in a virtual setting. So it was kind of like something that helped me to see how what might happen. So let's see.
I think that the risk in
so here I'm just going to let you listen to this interview.
The risk of perpetuating.
Can you hear the interview?
The myths that
Mike?
Just perpetuating the same narratives that have led to a lot of their creations, or that have, you know, led to a lot of people's shock of this past summer's uprising, and the fact that people didn't realize that this has been a problem for some time. And I think the idea of putting them into a context, into a proper context, whether that means moving them from these public spaces of domination to museums or entities where a full story can be told, or adjusting the public spaces that they're in and creating a new context and presenting opportunities for dialogue and engagement with them. Or in some cases, maybe not destruction, but deconstruction of them physically and intellectually and historically, you know, without trying to do the erasing. Because part, I think, of the danger of these types of monuments is, and to me, I feel like in large part, as I got older, it felt like in large part erasure of what really happened, of a true history, and erasure of like my identity, how I related, how I imagined some of my ancestors, like their stories, and even for individuals who have ancestors that fought in that battle, that didn't have stakes, that may have been manipulated, that didn't really, that were poor farmers or people that didn't have the stakes. It's a manipulation of their own history, and it just perpetuates that chaos and confusion. I think that
It's playing again. Sorry.
In completely like rendering them invisible is the risk of perpetuating the myths, that just perpetuating the same narratives that have led to a lot of their creations, or that have, you know, led to a lot of people's shock of.
Okay, so that's it for my formal part of the presentation. So just to recap, that interview that I just played for you, could you hear it, Mike?
Yeah, we can hear it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so that interview, and there's the Mozilla Hub's screenshot behind me. That interview was with Hosea Goldson, who's an artist and a lawyer living in Chattanooga. And I think his interview really encapsulates that the nuance that that some of these narratives address. That he's a young Black man, and his concern that the narratives won't, you know, continue to be part of our part of the national dialogue if we just remove the monuments. You know, if we just remove them and it's done, you know, I think his fear, which I think is probably legitimate, is that that there'll just be this perception that we're finished dealing with the history of race. So that's Hosea's interview, which I placed in Mozilla Hubs. There's a couple links. I was going towards the spinning compass there. There's a link there that goes to another interview, and then there's a link in the other room that has that. So that's been my way of sharing this project as a virtual space online. So right now it exists in that form. It'll soon be released on the App Store as the AR app. Whoops, that's my cat. She likes to be part of the action. And then in the spring, in April, I'm actually going to be doing an installation with using these interviews. I have about 100 interviews now. I'm still gathering them. I'm going to be using those interviews to create a sound piece and a visual installation in the cube, and that's going to be in the middle of April. And I'm working with two faculty in music, Annie Stevens and John Herrera, I believe is how you say his last name. Annie's a percussionist, John's a strings professor. And we're working with a composer, a young Black composer, to mix the interviews with music. And I'm creating an installation that'll use some of the projection qualities of the cube. So watch out for that. But yeah, I guess I just want to see if anybody has any questions and yeah, or comments.